Your next performer, Adam Stone, is a retired Marine with 20-plus years of experience, turned tree hugger. He likes long walks in the woods with his pup, Luna. He is often heard saying that you can't be lost if you never knew where you were, but he actually never says that. He attends San Diego City College, but with his heart set on SDSU, but he will also settle for DeVry Institute. He's not picky. Some might call him a warrior poet. Others might call him an asshole. I just call him my friend. Here's Adam Stone, everybody.
Phuket, Thailand. For months, we had heard stories from old salty sailors. It was described to us as a land where all vices are catered to, a place of hedonistic behavior where Eastern Europeans come to escape the winters, and the locals were more than willing to indulge one's very deepest desires. Over those last 6 months, we dreamt of this land, talking about what we would do once we stepped onto its shores. During that time, we talked about our own conquests. We had heard in glorifying detail all of our own sexual exploits. That's what 19-year-olds do trying to be men in a combat zone. It was a distraction from the world outside. Our fantasies allowed us to escape, if for a brief moment, all the suffering that we had forced to endure. Now there we were. The place where we had been fantasizing about. We had been salivating for. We had been crammed together for months in a floating city, now like sardines in a can, dressed in Hawaiian print shirts and board shorts, stuck together in plywood speedboats, rented by the Navy to ferry us from ship to shore. When the boat struck land of Thailand, my battle buddy, the guy who slept in the bunk above me, the guy who had heard all his sexual exploits from, jumped out of the boat, waded to the shore, dropped to his knees, and threw his hands in the air and announced at the top of his lungs, "Before the night is through, I shall bed you all." I placed my head in my hand, shaking it from side to side, laughing in dismay at his brazen declaration. He had never been one for modesty, so this was no different. On numerous occasions, I'd been taken aback by his over-the-top personality. As I looked up, I saw her. Standing amidst the European tourist, her tanned skin, her long, toned legs, was a stark contrast of the pale, overweight tourists that had beached themselves in awkward positions. Her belly button, playing peekaboo, was intoxicating, especially compared to the rotund Russians that seemed to occupy most of the beach. Her pink bra strap, barely visible, causing my mind to wander about her breasts, forming slight mounds under her shirt. Her black hair lay over both shoulders, framing her beautiful face. At that moment, my vision of bedding as many European tourists and Thai girls vanished. All I wanted to know was her. All I wanted to know was her name. My partner in crime threw his arm around my shoulder and said, "Come on, man, let's go." Still mesmerized by her beauty, I said, "Hold on, bro, I'll catch up." He tracked my gaze to the woman I'd been transfixed on and smiled from ear to ear, gave me a wink, pointed with fingers, and said, "All right, bro, but just remember one thing. A French fry can only bounce so high." To this day, I have no idea what that means. Only that it was his standard response to an almost impossible situation. I waded through the sea of pasty tourists baking in the sun and sat upon a wall separating the beach from the bars. I watched her serpentine from tourist to tourist to tourist, selling her wares of local fruits and handmade goods. Eventually, she came to me, and she asked, "Would you like to buy something?" Most enthusiastically, I said, "Uh-huh." I bought 2 bananas and a sliced mango. She grinned and asked, "Are you a Marine?" "Yes, ma'am." "Are you drinking?" Since I had literally just arrived in country, I said, "No, ma'am." Her smile widened, Showing perfect teeth, her eyes appeared to glow just a little bit brighter as they widened. Good. I don't like boys who drink. My heart tickled as her accent came through. I began blushing as I beamed brightly, sensing that something might be there. I quickly asked, where can a guy like me go that's kind of quiet and low-key? She named off a few places, and after a slight pause, she looked at me hesitantly and said, go to the Blue Parrot. And if I see you there, it would be nice. I immediately smiled so wide that it would put any Kodak commercial to shame. She smirked, turned, and said, maybe, and continued on with her duties. I jumped off the wall, found my friends, and told them that they would be going with me to the Blue Parrot that night, not only for moral support, but in case I got the signs wrong, they could buy me a few drinks to at least ease my pain. When I walked into the club that night, I saw her standing there, not in the middle of the dance floor with a spotlight on her like some cheesy-ass 80s movie. She was off to the side, by herself, swaying her hips to the music. She looked amazing. So soft, so delicate. I summoned my inner strength and walked up to her and asked, do you remember me? She smiled so brightly that it lit up the room and lifted any veil of trepidation in my heart. The energy level between us was so high. We didn't leave each other's side. We couldn't tell what happened the rest of the night. I know we danced a lot. We walked on the beach, talked about everything and anything that came to mind. We held hands, listening to the ocean waves, gazing at the stars, finding moments of serenity in each other's arms. When it was time for us to say goodbye, we made plans to meet at the wall the next morning where we first spoke. For my 3 days in Thailand, we did everything. We spent every waking hour with one another. She took me to places that only the locals knew about. I rode elephants, where she sat between my legs, and she taught me to ride pachyderms by pressing my toes behind its ears. We played with monkeys, where we would try to hide pieces of fruit on each other so the simians would have to tickle the other one to get its reward. We rode moped taxis everywhere, tipping the taxi drivers to go a little bit faster than the other, playing a high-speed game of cat and mouse. We ate in little restaurants down back alleys where only 2 things were on a handwritten menu. The food was amazing, just as the company I was keeping was amazing. On my last day in Thailand, she invited me to meet her family. I graciously accepted. When I arrived at her home, her mother wrapped me in her arms, embracing me like a long-lost child who finally made his way home. We sat around that table that night, eating homemade pad thai, rice, and fresh fruit, talking and laughing. I played with her 3 younger brothers in their small home where I practiced my wrestling and I won. And they practiced their Muay Thai on my shins and they won. That night, they showed me that family is family no matter where you are in this world. In turn, I showed them that not all Americans are James Dean cowboys, as her mother said it later on that evening as we said our goodbyes. She escorted me back to the beach where I first seen her. There we walked on the sands, now void of tourists, only speckled with lovers finding their own private moments in each other's arms. We sat on the wall, and I watched her from, and there, under the moon, I slowly leaned in and we kissed for the first time. It was that kind of kiss you read about in fairy tales. You know, where the lights are flashing, fireworks are going off, and Kenny G is playing in the background. Then, out of nowhere, she stopped and pushed me away. She closed her eyes and said, "Wait a minute, I have to tell you something." In a flash, everything that could possibly go wrong at this moment rushed through my head. One of the little brothers I had met earlier in the evening is really her son. I never asked, I just assumed. She has a boyfriend. No, wait, a husband. What else could it be? She has AIDS. It was the early 90s. This all went through my mind in a split second. She looked at me with wet eyes, reached up and began to stroke the crucifix she wore upon her neck, and said, "I'm really a boy." I was shocked and confused. I'm sure I had a look of dismay on my face, and again, in a split second, every emotion that could run through my mind did, except for fear, or hate, or anger. However, in my mind, I said the one thing that could possibly be the worst thing when someone shows their most vulnerable side. What slipped out of my mouth was, "How interesting." As soon as the words escaped my mouth, I saw the weight of the world seem to crash down upon her. She placed her hands on the wall, pushed herself up, and began to walk away and saying in an almost breathless voice, "I understand." I immediately reached out and grasped her wrist, pulled her back, and as apologetically as possible, I asked her to wait and give me a moment. I tried to explain that's not what I meant at all. What I meant to say was, I have had the best time of my life, and I admitted to her, it's not how I see my future. But I have loved every minute I have spent with her, and I don't want it to stop now. She gave a slight smile, wiped away a tear, and sat down again beside me. We talked the rest of the night. We talked about her true self. We talked about her internal conflict with herself growing up, not knowing what was right and wrong. We talked about her conflictions with herself and her religion, of them not accepting her for who she really was. We talked about her coming out to her family that I had just met hours before, how they embraced her with love, understanding, and compassion, just as they had done with me when they welcomed me into their home. She allowed me into her most vulnerable side. On that wall, I fell deeper in love with her. My heart swelled with each passing moment. As our hands entwined with each other's, as she rested her head on my shoulder, her arm wrapped around mine and mine wrapped around hers. In a moment of silence, watching the moon cascade its glow across the bay, she looked up at me, her eyes wide and innocent of the world outside. I leaned in and kissed her once more. This kiss was just as perfect, just as amazing as before. We embraced the rest of the night, not wanting to let each other go, not wanting to let each other slip away. When it was time for me to go back to my ship, we walked together hand in hand. At the boat launch, we embraced each other one last time with a hug that was pure love and compassion, not knowing when we would see each other again, if at all. She leaned in and whispered in my ear, "Thank you." And my reply was simple, "No, thank you." As the boat separated us, all I could think of was she changed how I saw the world. Just months prior, I was in Somalia, watching the world fall apart to genocide and tribal conflict. I saw death everywhere I went, even in the faces of the living. Now, even as my heart was sinking at our separation, I felt a lightness about me. She showed me that the world is a much more beautiful place than I could have ever imagined. I quietly thanked her for opening my eyes to see past the superficial, past the ugliness that I tended to fixate on. I thanked her over and over and over again, allowing my mind to see the beauty that lies within each of us and around us. I whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for being true to yourself and sharing who you really are with me." Over the years, I returned to Phuket. I always looked for her. I would walk the beaches expecting to find her selling her wares. I went to where they once lived, but nobody knew she was. I would wander through the bars, looking at the bar girls and ladyboys and wondering if this is where she wound up. Every night, I found myself at the Blue Parrot, hoping that I might see her once again, standing off to the side, swaying her hips to the music. I don't know what I would have said or done. I do know that I've always had the desire to see her again, to touch her one last time, to wrap her in my arms, look into her eyes, and possibly kiss? In 2005, when the tsunami struck Phuket, I found myself watching the news continuously, hoping to see a sign of her. I wanted to know. No, I needed to know that she was okay, that she survived all the death that had occurred. I wanted some glimpse that she was alive and well, and I wanted to see that smile once again. However, I knew in my heart that I would never see her again, and that smile was lost somewhere between my memory of her and a vast raging ocean. Thank you.
Adam Stone, everybody.